Nobody expected Stephen A. Smith to react this strongly. The moment reports started circulating about LeBron James securing yet another major business deal outside the NBA while entering free agency at 41 years old, most people assumed the conversation would focus on basketball. Would he return to the Lakers? Would he retire? Would another team take a chance on the league's oldest superstar? Instead, the spotlight immediately shifted somewhere else. Stephen A. Smith once again turned the discussion into something much bigger.
At first glance, LeBron James appears to be facing the same decision every aging superstar eventually faces. He is a free agent. He is entering another offseason surrounded by uncertainty. And after more than 2 decades in the NBA, questions naturally begin to emerge about how much longer he intends to continue playing. But unlike almost every player who has ever entered free agency, LeBron's situation is completely unique. The money from basketball is no longer the driving factor. His financial empire stretches far beyond the NBA. Endorsements, investments, media companies, ownership stakes, and partnerships have transformed him from a basketball player into a global business force. While most athletes rely on their next contract to secure their future, LeBron secured his future years ago. That reality changes everything. It changes how teams negotiate with him. It changes how the media talks about him.
Point 1. The business empire that changed everything. Long before LeBron James became a billionaire, he understood something that many professional athletes never fully grasp. Playing basketball would eventually end. No matter how talented he was, no matter how many championships he won, there would come a day when he could no longer rely on athletic ability to generate wealth. That understanding shaped nearly every major business decision he made throughout his career. While many athletes focused on maximizing endorsement checks, LeBron increasingly focused on ownership. He wanted equity. He wanted investments. He wanted assets that would continue growing long after retirement. Over time, that strategy produced extraordinary results. His relationship with Nike evolved into one of the most valuable athlete partnerships ever created. His investments in companies like Blaze Pizza generated enormous returns. His ownership stake connected him to some of the biggest sports organizations in the world. Then came Spring Hill Company, a media venture designed to give athletes something they had rarely possessed before.
Point 2. Why Stephen A. Smith never stopped talking. For years, Stephen A. Smith has maintained a complicated relationship with LeBron James. On one hand, he consistently praises LeBron's accomplishments. He acknowledges his greatness. He recognizes his longevity. He openly admits that LeBron belongs among the greatest players in basketball history. But on the other hand, there has always been an unmistakable tension underneath that praise. Stephen A. has spent years questioning decisions, challenging narratives, and refusing to simply accept every popular opinion surrounding LeBron. What makes the situation fascinating is that Stephen A.'s criticism rarely focuses solely on basketball. Instead, he often focuses on perception. He focuses on how LeBron is viewed by fans, the media, and even by LeBron himself.
Point 3. The GOAT debate that refuses to die. At the center of this entire conflict lies a debate that has dominated basketball conversations for years. Who is the greatest player of all time? For millions of fans, the answer is LeBron James. For millions of others, the answer remains Michael Jordan. For Stephen A. Smith, there has never been any uncertainty. Jordan occupies the top spot. LeBron occupies the second. And that distinction may seem small, but it changes everything. Because when someone is already considered one of the greatest athletes ever, the only remaining question becomes whether they deserve the number 1 position. Stephen A. repeatedly argues that Jordan's championships, scoring titles, defensive accomplishments, and undefeated finals record separate him from everyone else. Meanwhile, LeBron supporters point toward longevity, versatility, all-time scoring records, and unprecedented consistency.
Point 4.
Bronny James changes the entire relationship. For years, the tension between LeBron James and Stephen A. Smith remained relatively controlled. There were disagreements, criticisms, and occasional verbal exchanges through media appearances, but nothing truly explosive. Then Bronny James entered the NBA conversation. Suddenly, the disagreement became much more personal. Questions surrounding Bronny's development, readiness, and draft position generated enormous debate throughout the basketball world. Some believed he deserved every opportunity he received. Others questioned whether his last name provided advantages unavailable to most prospects. Stephen A. Smith found himself directly in the middle of that discussion. Although he argued that much of his criticism was aimed at LeBron rather than Bronny. Point 5. Control of the narrative. Perhaps the most important disagreement between LeBron James and Stephen A. Smith has nothing to do with basketball at all. It revolves around control. Over the years, LeBron built media platforms capable of reaching millions of people directly. Through podcasts, documentaries, interviews, and original content, he gained the ability to communicate without relying on traditional sports media. Supporters view this as empowerment. They argue that athletes should control their own stories, rather than allowing outsiders to define them. Critics, however, see a different issue. They worry that too much control can limit accountability. Stephen A. Smith falls firmly into that second category. He believes that when powerful figures control the platforms, the messaging, and the narrative simultaneously, genuine criticism becomes more difficult. According to Stephen A., this is the true issue underlying years of conflict. Not endorsements, not contracts, not even championships. Control. Who gets to shape public perception? Who gets to define success? Who gets to decide how history remembers a career? These questions explain. As LeBron James enters another chapter of uncertainty, one thing remains clear. His influence extends far beyond basketball. Whether he signs another NBA contract or decides retirement is approaching, his business empire will continue growing. His media presence will continue expanding. His legacy will continue being debated. And somewhere in the middle of all that discussion will be Stephen A. Smith, still questioning, still criticizing, still refusing to change his opinion. The fascinating part is that both men have already won in their the legacy question that never goes away. What makes this entire situation so fascinating is that none of it should matter anymore. Think about it. LeBron James has already accomplished more than most athletes could ever dream of. He entered the league as one of the most hyped prospects in sports history and somehow exceeded those expectations. He became a champion. He became an MVP. He became the league's all-time leading scorer. He became a billionaire. He became a global icon. By almost any reasonable standard, the debate should already be over. And yet, somehow, it isn't. Because every time LeBron adds another achievement to his resume, the conversation immediately circles back to the same question. Is he the greatest player who ever lived? For some people, the answer has been years for years. They point to the long. In Stephen A.'s view, Jordan didn't simply beat opponents. He made them believe they could never beat him. And that belief matters. Because when discussing the greatest player of all time, many people aren't asking who had the best numbers. They're asking who had the greatest impact, who inspired the most fear, who controlled the biggest moments. That is why this debate refuses to die. And it is also why LeBron's business empire has become part of the discussion. Because every new documentary, every podcast appearance, every media project, and every public statement gets analyzed through that same lens. Is LeBron simply telling his story, or is he actively shaping how history will remember him? Depending on who you ask, the answer changes completely. The power of controlling your own story. For decades, athletes depended on traditional media to tell their stories. Reporters decided which narratives gained attention.
Television networks decided which moments mattered. Columnists shaped public opinion. Athletes could respond, but they rarely controlled the conversation.
At its core, this has never really been a story about contracts. It has never really been a story about endorsements. And it has never really been a story about money. The money simply made everything bigger. The real story has always been about influence. How much influence should one athlete have? How much influence should one media personality have? And what happens when both believe they are protecting the truth? LeBron James built one of the most successful careers in sports history. Stephen A. Smith built one of the most influential voices in sports media history. Neither accomplishment can be denied. The disagreement begins when those accomplishments collide. Because LeBron sees himself as someone who earned the right to tell his own story. Stephen A. sees himself as someone whose job is to challenge that story whenever necessary. And somewhere between those two positions lies the debate that continues captivating millions of fans around the world. A debate that has lasted years. A debate that will likely continue long after LeBron finally retires. And a debate that neither side appears willing to surrender. The only thing we know for certain is this. As long as LeBron James remains one of the most discussed athletes on earth, and as long as Stephen A. Smith continues sitting behind a microphone, this conversation is far from over.